Until very recently, I was a project manager for the Department of External Intelligence, a government organization tasked with probing the boundaries of human consciousness and unraveling mysteries beyond the paranormal. The things I have witnessed far exceed our expectations of the universe and shouldn't remain hidden, even if the truth is horrific. If you are reading this, I am so sorry for what is to come. When I was younger, my parents pushed me hard for good grades. Giving me the life they never had seemed to be their only duty, even if it meant that my childhood suffered. And I gave them what they wanted: the best marks in school, the hope of a successful career, and lots of money. Unfortunately, nobody, not even my cruel father, could have predicted that I would end up working for a secret branch of the government, one whose sole duty is uncovering facts that the mortal mind can barely comprehend. I started as a data analyst, but the executives soon realized that my skills could be better used elsewhere. It took just a few tests for me to be introduced to the psychical experiment sector, aimed at identifying uses for psychic phenomena. I was deemed to have special abilities and was told I could tap into a realm that few humans could. For a while, I was an agent for remote viewing. Essentially, my mind was used to spy on foreign nations. With some meditative steps, I was able to visualize complex environments and assist our army in pinpointing the locations of enemy bases. Was this ethical? I don't know, but it provided me with a sense of accomplishment, so I continued to do it. The more important I became in my job, the more I had to hide from my family and friends. My parents died thinking I was a pencil pusher for the government, and the few relationships I've had have remained short due to my secret life. The longer I've stayed with the department, the more information I have been given. But it was only once I became appointed as a project manager that I learned details that, if leaked, would change the world forever. I'm sure you have noticed the increased sightings of UFOs, or UAPs, in recent years. Their frequency has been at the center of my new position in the department. You see, these aren't vehicles piloted by little green men, they are beings themselves. Classified internally as seraphs, these entities have been visiting us for centuries. The Bible called them angels. The Quran named them malaika. But they are the same things that have been seen in the sky of every continent on Earth. I was told that they didn't know where they came from, or why they had visited us. Sadly, for them, I have a unique intuition, and knew that was a lie. I had spent many hours in the office after hours, dissecting classified documents and logging into computers above my access level. The more vivid the details became, the more I questioned my actions. What if I uncovered something I didn't want to? You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, a silly metaphor for a twisted reality I was soon to live. It took me many months, but I eventually pieced together why the 33rd floor of our building is off limits. The Department of External Intelligence has been communicating with the Seraphs and has a machine built for this sole purpose. Last week, I used the device. It was a day like any other, at least that was the role I played. I scanned my card to enter the building and made my way to my office on the 24th floor. I put on a happy face as I greeted my companions in the rustic elevator, patiently waiting for the neon green screen to tick higher while soft synth sounds filled the cramped space. Finally reaching my secretary, I cleared my schedule and began to set the plan into motion. I couldn't take the elevator to my destination. The buttons skipped straight from 32 to 34. However, I did learn that a maintenance ladder runs up the building's spine. Applying some remote viewing techniques, I discovered an access hatch on floor 28 behind some servers. This was all I could gain as the department recently installed consciousness dampeners, blurring my external vision. Getting to the server room was easy, and it took but a small distraction to enter the hatch as I began climbing the maintenance ladder. I was on the 28th floor, but looking down it seemed as though the shaft stretched into an infinite abyss with no end in sight. The department was unlike any other building, with winding corridors and frequent cases of spectral appearances. A ladder stretching to an impossible darkness seemed on brand. Entering the 33rd floor took some time, but with some minor effort, I was in the sector that only executives had access to. Standing in what appeared to be a reception area, the silence of my new environment startled me. I expected a welcoming party, but was met with nobody at all. The department's building was informally named the Monolith due to its brutalist design and tall concrete walls. The 33rd floor was no different, with a ceiling that stretched higher than one would have expected the facility to accommodate. The area I was in was adorned in a familiar old-school look featuring Persian carpets, homely lamps, and box computers. We were told that vintage technology offered better protection against hackers. I stood facing a door labeled Testing and Research. It seemed like the sign I needed, so I swiftly made my way through. Presented with a long corridor, I knew that my goal stood at the end. Walking past the many doors to my left and right, I saw what appeared to be ancient symbols. The sounds I heard from each of them were almost indescribable. Some seemed like soft moans, while others appeared to be painful screams. I have no idea what was being done in these rooms. The double wooden doors at the end of the corridor clashed with the concrete surrounding it, but I suppose this was another example of the department's unique style. Before I swung the doors open, I noticed the digital camera in the corner. I had surely been caught, so there was no time to waste. To say I was shocked by what I saw would be an understatement. I had expected a massive machine with tubes and towering screens. Instead, the room contained only a leather couch facing a bulky CRT TV perched on a wooden stand. There was nothing else. No furniture, no monitoring equipment, just an outdated entertainment setup in a cold concrete space. I edged closer and saw a remote resting on the couch. Surprisingly, there were no numbers, and the only button was a round red one for power. I had come this far, so I did the only thing that made sense. I sat on the couch, pressing the button. Bursting alive, the ocean of static flooded my mind, and it became clear that this was the machine I was after. It's hard to describe, but I felt as though I entered a state where time had no meaning. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. A seraph was there with me. I could sense them. It didn't speak words, yet I understood what was being communicated. Closer to a feeling, information appeared in my mind as though I manifested it, but I knew it was foreign. It was as though the seraph spent a few moments within my skin. At first I asked my pre-planned questions. I wanted to know where it came from and why it was visiting Earth. I quickly learned that languages developed by humans are a prime illustration of our insignificance in the universe. This is the best way I can put it. If you think about a house, with every room being a planet, we can move from one room to another, a crude metaphor for space travel. If we are sitting in the living room, the seraphs have always been here, in a place that occupies the same space but in reverse, mirrored dimensions, two areas next to each other, but because they are back to back, one doesn't notice the other. The seraph told me that the reason that so many of them have decided to visit us is that they are partaking in a great harvest. They have made their way through many universes, and now it was our turn. Human souls hold special meaning in their existence, and it is only through our death that they can be harvested. Through it all, I had no fear. The seraph comforted me and guided me along each stage of the conversation. It whispered wise truths and made me feel as though my normal life had been but a dream compared to true reality. With my mind barely comprehending the secrets I had learnt, the TV zapped off, leaving a brief imprint of static as it slowly turned pitch black. I had been told too much, perhaps more than I wanted, and so I ran to the door. By the time I had reached the floor's hatch, 2 department officials were already there to arrest me. Their voices appeared calm, yet their grip on the concussion devices remained firm. They had a clear intent to take me down with whatever force was necessary. What happened next, I don't remember. It seems as though a few minutes were wiped from my memory. I recall putting my hands behind my head in surrender. When I came to, my hands gripped the jagged edge of a broken lamp, with corpses slumped at my feet. 2 dead bodies lay before me, mangled into a portrait of ripped flesh. I had to escape. I would surely be locked up for something I don't remember doing. Diving into the maintenance hatch, I flew down the ladder as quickly as I could, racing out of the building while trying to hide the blood on my clothes. I believe some people saw the stains, but they could have just as easily been staring at a madman running through a government facility. I am writing this message on a library computer. I dare not go home, as I will surely be found there. On the run for 7 days now, I don't know what is going to happen, but the world deserves to know the truth. Great pain and mass deaths are coming. I know this because the seraph has continued to talk to me, giving me instructions for the coming months. I refuse to die, and so I made a deal. I will help them. I will be a harvester in human form. In return, they will ensure that my soul remains eternal. My whole life I have been controlled by my father, by the department. But this pact was mine to make. For the first time in my life, I felt powerful. If you are reading this, I am so sorry for what is to come. Hold your loved ones tight and enjoy the time you have left. We will find you. You cannot hide forever. I sit here looking at the blue painted walls with the same vintage movie posters I've had since I was 13. This room has been my comfort zone since I can remember. Living in the basement, I have always had a sense of independence, even at early ages. I could customize it to my design. I never let my parents' views bleed in here. I am a religious person, but I don't need a cross on every wall, proverbs on every mantle, and paintings of Christ everywhere in between. Down here I had freedom, but now it seems like this will be my tomb. I write this not only to get out the raving anxieties eating at my insides like a starved tiger, but to perhaps rationalize what is the completely irrational. My parents are the he-typical conservative Christian type, real Republican poster children. Growing up, my Sundays were completely haunted by 3-hour-long morning sermons from a pastor with eyes that wandered to a disturbingly downward. You would think my mom's eyes were on her chest if you even saw one conversation between the two. The rest of my early childhood ends up being a blur of Sunday studies and so many prayers that when I even see a plate of food being set on a table, not that I have for a long time, my hands reflexively go into a prayer without me even realizing it. Once I got a little older, around 16, I started to get sick of it. My friends would always post pictures of them at the beach on Sunday in bikinis that my mom would call an exorcist for if she ever saw me in. Through months of rolling eyes and dirty looks during Sunday service, my mom finally confronted me. "Are you questioning your faith?" she asked, coming into my room unannounced one night a few months back. "No, Mom, I still believe in him. I just don't know why I can't have faith and do things my friends do at the same time." I responded, still hiding my true feelings. "Honey, on the day of judgment we all must come to terms with our transgressions and make repent of our earthly sins. It is a fallen world after all. Ever since the serpent tricked Eve in the garden, we have had to learn to coexist with our natural-born sin by," she began. I knew another sermon was coming. I needed an out. "You're right, Mom," I said, putting my hand on hers where she sat at the end of my bed. "I was just falling into temptation. I won't let it happen again, trust me," I said with my best fake smile I could muster. "I trust you, sweetheart. You know I was once young too, believe it or not," she said with a smile and a giggle before getting up to kiss me on the forehead and saying goodnight. For the next few weeks, I just tried to keep a low profile, do my best to put on a happy face around the creepy pastor, but I slowly felt my faith slipping away. Service after service, I became more and more detached and began to seriously question who exactly my parents consider as their faith. Do they really believe in God, or is it just a helpful excuse to control my life further? Last week, I had enough. On Sunday night, my friends texted me that they were going to a friend's house to smoke weed and hang out. Sundays are lockdown days. I am absolutely not allowed to see any of my friends all day, as it's reserved entirely for family and prayer. However, living in the basement grants some privileges, chief among which is my window. The screen door covers the window, but can easily be popped out of place. So around 11 p.m., after my parents were fast asleep, I snuck out and bolted to my friend's car, waiting for me in the alley behind our house. "Hey, choir girl," Ashley said as I jumped in the back seat like I was fleeing the scene of bank robbery. "Drive, get me the fuck out of here," I said, tapping her shoulder relentlessly. Once we pulled up to Ashley's friend Megan's house, she stopped, put the car in park, and grabbed a baggie with a joint out of her backpack. "If I'm going to be in the room with Josh now that he and Megan are dating, I'm going to need this," she said, fiddling with her lighter, trying to get a spark before taking a puff and handing me the freshly lit joint. I have never smoked before, never even in the same room as someone who smoked cigarettes before. My immediate reaction was to say, No, thank you, I said, waving my hand in the air. Ashley shrugged her shoulders. Suit yourself, she said, taking another hit. We sat talking for a minute while she finished the joint. Your parents still running a dictatorship? Ashley asked after a brief moment of silence in the conversation. Yeah, the older I get, the more they are convinced that whenever I'm out with friends, I'm worshiping the devil or having orgies with every guy in town, I responded, rolling my eyes. I mean, not on Sundays, at least, Ashley said before immediately bursting out laughing at her own joke. I laughed with her, and once we both caught our breath, I stared at what little weed was left in her joint. You know what? I'm dead if I get caught regardless, I said, holding my hand out to accept the joint. Look at my choir girl go, Ashley responded. You can finish it, my treat. I took one puff and immediately thought I swallowed an ember. My throat burned like a building on fire, and I coughed until my eyes watered and I was gasping for air like a drowning man. Ashley laughed and said, It's okay, you won't have virgin lungs forever. After coughing my way through the rest of the joint, we went inside. What little I remember mostly consisted of me being slumped on the couch like a weighted blanket was draped over me, even though all I had was my hoodie and leggings on. When Ashley dropped me off a block from my house, I got out and tried to smell every part of me to make sure the weed smell had stayed in the car. As I turned the corner and saw the living room light on in my house, I felt the ground fall from beneath me. My heart raced so fast I thought it would never stop. I spent the next 10 minutes walking back and forth trying to think of what to do, until I decided that if I try to sneak back in through the window, maybe they won't notice. Walking to my backyard, I caught a glimpse of my living room, and my father was standing up in his pajamas, walking back and forth, talking on the phone. My mother was sitting on the couch with tears running down her cheeks, crouched over in prayer. At that moment, I knew I was in trouble. My mom was in tears, and my dad was rubbing his neck out of stress, not looking far from tears either. After sneaking back into my window, I lay in my bed waiting to either fall asleep or be yelled at by my parents. I ended up falling asleep. Nothing too unusual happened during my sleep. I didn't hear any strange noise or loud banging, but when I woke up, the stairs and door that led to the living room were gone. What was once my staircase and the only way out other than my window was just flat ground, covered in the same hardwood my floor was. Jumping out of bed, I ran to what now was solid ground, trying to make any sense of the situation. How do my stairs just disappear? How did this happen overnight? And how didn't I get woken up by it? An immediate sense of claustrophobia overtakes me. I feel the weight of a truck on my chest as I struggle for breath. I thought of my window, and before the thought fully registered in my mind, I had jumped on my bed and pulled on the window with every inch of my strength. It wouldn't budge, and with a horror I can't describe to this day, I noticed the window was welded shut. I immediately grab any item in reach and throw it at my window, eventually picking up my entire wooden nightstand and slamming it against the glass. It didn't even crack. I got at this for what may have been hours. Eventually, I collapsed out of exhaustion. The only thing I can do now is scream. Mom, Dad, help me, I'm trapped! I shout until my voice breaks and tears fill my eyes like a bucket key in a hurricane. They didn't respond. No one came for me. My phone doesn't have service or Wi-Fi. I have a TV and old classic DVDs my dad owns, but that's it. No food. Only water source is the sink in my bathroom. I spend the rest of the day pacing back and forth, intermittently screaming out for help until I notice a figure walking past my window. I jump up to the window and start banging on the glass like a caged chimpanzee. It's my mom. She's sitting on our backyard furniture, just staring into blank space. It looks like she has been crying for hours. Her eyes were blood red and tired. Her face was puffy and downtrodden. I bang even harder on the glass, screaming at her. Mom, I'm here, please let me out! She doesn't even move a muscle. What the fuck is happening? Is she ignoring me? Can she just not hear me? There's no way she can't hear me. I'm screaming as loud as I can, and the windows aren't that thick. Did they do this? Is that why she's crying? What kind of twisted parents would do this to their own daughter? I remember laying in bed with these questions racing through my mind over and over. Once night fell, I was still trapped. I laid in bed trying to sleep, hoping it was just a bad dream or I would wake up and my stairs would be back and everything would be okay. They made their point. I won't ever sneak out or touch weed again. With unimaginable dread, the next morning I woke up and my stairs were still gone. I looked out my window again. Nothing. No one. Just the same patio furniture we have had since I was a toddler. I looked down and noticed all the clocks in my room and even on my phone had stopped. They all froze like a lake in the winter at 3:33 in the morning. The only way I could tell time now was through sundown and sunrise. I tried screaming again. I screamed and I screamed until my vocal cords were about to snap like old brake lines. I'll never forget the panic, like coming out of a car crash. I knew I absolutely had to do something, but I was fighting in a world I didn't even understand. The threat I faced didn't even have any direct attack. It stood ominously in front of me. I can't quite describe it, but just seeing that blank wall in the corner felt like a figure staring me down at the edge of my bed at every waking second. My panic quickly turned into a blind rage. Thoughts of the physical and emotional pain I would subject my parents for putting me here drove me as I picked up my battered nightstand and flung it at the space my door used to be. Over and over with each crash against the wall, the nightstand breaking into smaller and smaller pieces, but the wall stood, not even a chip in the paint. I push my dresser over to the torturous space of nothing and start slamming the now scattered wooden pieces directly into the wall with all the strength I could muster. Nothing. I slumped down and caught my breath. There I sat, alone, trapped in the place I once found comfort in, but now see as a twisted prison cell playing tricks on my psyche. For the rest of the day, I just laid in bed and watched some of the old DVDs I had on my shelf. The next day, I spent what I think was hours just looking out my window. It was fall now. When I became trapped, it was the middle of summer. How did it fast forward 2 months in a single night? My only perception of time was the daylight of my window. Had I really been in here that long? It seems every time I blink my eyes, I lose days. But is it really a loss? What kind of life am I living if I'm just a rat in a lab being experimented on by some demented god? From my perspective at the time of writing this, I have been down here for 25,430 sunsets. Not counting the first few nights, I wasn't keeping track. I'm not hungry, I'm not thirsty, and so much time has passed in my window that I don't even know the people in my backyard anymore. My parents died years ago, but yesterday for me. I can't ask for help. I know better now. I have shouted, cried, broken every piece of art and furniture in my room, and the only change has been a chip in the paint size of my fingernail. This isn't over me smoking weed. I don't even know if this is my parents doing. How could it have been? Ever since the night my stairs vanished, I haven't heard a single creak from upstairs. People walk past every day. What would they say if they learned the suburban home they just walked past has had a girl in the basement for over 60 years? For the first few nights, I remember praying, but I now realize I was praying to my tormentor. If there is a God, he's forgotten me. Growing up, I attended what I thought was a charismatic church that, in hindsight, I realize was an apocalyptic cult. They had a lot of strange rituals and customs, but none more important than speaking in tongues. The church believed that if one prayed and begged hard enough, and if they were worthy, they would be able to speak in the language of heaven, and by doing so, it would be a sign of a divine presence residing inside of you, and that once you had this gift, you would be raptured and spared from the coming apocalypse on earth and the eternal torment of the afterlife. If you hadn't yet spoken in tongues, you wouldn't go to heaven when the rapture, the moment when the saved ascended to heaven, occurred. You'd be left on earth to experience the apocalypse, and when you died, you'd burn in hell for eternity. That's a lot for a kid to process. The way to get this gift of the Spirit was to go up to the front of the church during the altar call, which happened toward the end of every service, right after the collection plate was passed. The congregation, traumatized by the pastor's frequent and vivid descriptions of the eternal torment awaiting the unsaved, would gather around the altar, praying for the gift of tongues for themselves or members of the church who hadn't yet received it. Those who didn't have it were instructed to pray, praise God. and beg for the gift. We do this regularly, desperately, and the altar calls could last for hours. Imagine it. Children and adults all crowded around the red-carpeted steps of the altar, screaming, spraying saliva, sobbing, praying, sweating, and placing their hands on each other, all pleading for this gift, genuinely expecting the rapture to happen at any moment. Honestly, I spent most of my childhood and early teens trying to receive this elusive gift. I spent countless hours at the altar, begging and pleading with God to grant me the one thing that would save me from hell. Night after night, surrounded by screaming adults, I begged God until my voice was raw. To add insult to injury, it seemed like at every altar call, someone around me received the gift. To my left or to my right, someone would begin babbling incoherently, collapse to the ground, and then be helped up to their feet by a celebrating congregation. But despite all my efforts and sincerity, each night it was denied to me. Eventually, the crowd around the altar would disperse. Late at night, often around midnight, the service would finally end, and we'd go home. I'd spend the drive back staring out the car window at the night sky, my clothes damp with sweat, and my throat sore from pleading with a God who refused to answer. Growing up, the fear of hell, the apocalypse, and eternal damnation was a real force in my life. I can remember times when my mom came home late from work, and I was convinced she'd been raptured, leaving me behind. I'd hide in my closet, clutching some sort of improvised weapon, a broom, a steak knife, etc., certain that the damned would soon kick in the front door. For what purpose? Maybe to eat me or sacrifice me to Satan. I wasn't sure what the damned did, but I knew it couldn't be good. All this made for an interesting, high anxiety, and, at times, sleep-deprived childhood. When I was around 16, the pastor started preaching that the rapture was particularly imminent. We began having service every night about the coming apocalypse, and the importance of speaking in tongues for the unsaved. The pastor warned that hell would be infinitely worse for people like me who knew the truth, but hadn't accepted the gift. This was especially frustrating for me. I was trying so hard. After the collection plate was passed, we had the inevitable altar call, and at each of them I tried harder and harder to speak in tongues. But it still wasn't happening. I started to think maybe I was immune or something. Finally, after an especially long altar call, the pastor took me aside and told me, in a voice filled with compassion, concern, and perhaps a hint of exasperation, that if I just repeated the word hallelujah over and over again, God could use it as a foothold to enter my heart and grant me the gift. At the next altar call, I gave it a try. I knelt at the altar, shouting hallelujah over and over again. I was helped by an older man in the church who often mentored and prayed with the young boys, either one-on-one at his house, which he preferred, or at the altar. He considered this his calling. This oddly, overly affectionate man, a self-proclaimed prayer warrior, whispered words of encouragement in my ear as he knelt behind me, rubbing his hands tenderly across my sweating back and shoulders. Hallelujah! I shouted, again and again. My arms waved, my body swayed, and my knees ached. My throat was raw and my voice was fading. The words began to run together, syllables dropping and merging. This only excited the people around me, especially the man behind me. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! I kept shouting faster and faster. Exhausted, the words blurred into nonsense. Around me, the church members screamed and prayed with ecstatic fervor. The pastor, now kneeling in front of me, tangled her fingers in my hair with one hand, grabbed my chin with the other, and brought her fleshy face close to mine, pressing her puckered lips against my ear. "No, say it like this," she whispered, her breath hot, moist, and intrusive. And then she began repeating the word hallelujah, improvising like a jazz musician, creating her own excited babble of syllables to accompany mine. Behind me, the man prayed harder, his breath hot on my neck, his body pressed close to mine. His hands moved roughly over my shoulders and back. He whispered in my ear, urging me to pray harder, harder, to let it inside me. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! I tried to keep shouting, but my voice faltered, my words turning to mush. The crowd erupted in a frenzy of excitement. The word blurred, lost its meaning, became a nonsensical noise. My throat burned, my body trembled. The pastor kept whispering in my ear, but her voice seemed to change. The word she kept repeating was now unrecognizable. The first syllable, a percussive exhalation. The second, a wheezing gasp. The third, obscenely stretched out. The last, almost a cry of pain. Her wet lips squirmed against my ear like worms. I felt her tongue in my ear, her voice in my head, and suddenly something shifted. The air grew thick and cold. The sounds around me suddenly muffled and distant. I felt like I was submerged in dark water. A strange presence loomed all around me. No, inside me. A watching, waiting, something. I felt 1,000,000 miles away, and a coldness crept into my chest, an internal ocean of black water teeming with something dark and squirming, rising up my throat and bursting out of my mouth. It hurt. I started screaming. We all seemed to be screaming in unison, and the lights were flickering, and suddenly I was being helped to my feet. I had apparently blacked out, collapsing face forward onto the steps of the altar. It wasn't an unusual occurrence at the church. They called it being slain by the Spirit. I had rug burns on my forehead for weeks. Still, as I came to, all around me, everyone was ecstatic. "You've got it," someone shouted, their hands gripping my arms and shoulders. Everyone was happy. I was being congratulated, showered with love. And in the middle of it all, someone, I don't know who, whispered in my ear, "It's inside you now." And I felt a strange chill. I knew I should be happy. I tried to convince myself I was, but I felt different. Hollowed out, violated in a way I couldn't quite grasp or articulate. Later, before the service ended, the pastor asked me to come up to the pulpit to make an announcement. Numb, exhausted, and uncertain, I walked up. As I neared the pulpit, I glanced at the pastor. Our eyes met, and I still remember her expression. Though she smiled, her face seemed smug and sly, as though the two of us were co-conspirators. She nodded toward the pulpit, silently encouraging me to play along. I stepped up and looked out at the congregation, the only friends and community I had ever known. Their upturned faces were expectant, like children waiting for a story. I made my choice. "I spoke in tongues," I said into the microphone. My voice was raw and my throat was sore, but the declaration boomed around the church with a confidence I didn't feel. The congregation erupted in applause and shouts of "Amen" and "Praise the Lord." Their words blended into an indecipherable babble that sounded like tongues. Hallelujah. But I wasn't exactly sure what it was that I'd done. I wasn't sure what I'd let in. That night I couldn't sleep. My room felt suffocating, the air thick with something unseen, some new and terrible thing inside of me and around me. I lay awake, replaying the altar scene in my mind. The man's hands, the pastor's smile, the cold presence that had seemingly entered me, the feeling of something inside of me boiling over, the pain, and the beginning of a scream. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint and guttural from my own mouth. But it wasn't me speaking. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't English or the word hallelujah. It was something older, darker, like the sound of something massive choking up something vile, but I could understand it. "Not now," it said, from my own mouth. Not now, but soon. I froze, my body paralyzed as the words seemed to echo in the room and my mind. And then, just as suddenly, the voice, the feeling, was gone. I refused to go back to the church after that. Rejecting the faith of my family at such a young age tore my life apart. But I survived. I grew up. And over the following decades, I found peace, love, and my place in the wider world. Or I thought I had. But last night, as I was washing dishes, I started to gag, cough, and gasp for air. And I felt it again, rising up. The voice that wasn't a voice. The words that weren't words in any human language. They burned and tore at my chest and throat and spilled out into the empty air around me. "Really soon now," it said through me. with undisguised glee. The plate shattered in my hand, cutting deep into my palm. Cold dread rushed through me, and then, somehow beyond me, standing at my sink in my empty house, with blood welling up in my cupped palm, I realized I wasn't alone with the voice or the pain. Not really. I could feel them. The connection snapped into place, somehow simultaneously stabbing and tearing at me, a pain sharp, dull, and overwhelming, like a clawed finger pushing into the center of my mind, slicing, stretching, and flipping a switch. I knew all of them, the others, the ones who'd been there at the church when I was a boy. Their thoughts, their faces, their secrets, loves, and fears flooded my mind. They were scattered across the world. Most had moved on, healed, and built new lives just like me, but I knew at that moment, we all knew, that we were still marked and connected by the same terrible fate and bond. The voice was in them too, rising up, burning, tearing at us all. I could feel their fear, confusion, pain, mirroring my own, and a growing understanding of what was coming. A terrible, all-consuming compulsion building inside me, in all of us, pressing, urgent, and impossible to resist any longer. For death, destruction, chaos, glorious purpose, and hell on earth. The voice was rising up again, preparing to speak. In agony, I clawed at my face and throat, tearing at my collar in desperation, unintentionally smearing blood from my cut hand across my face, mouth, and neck. Blood, red, hot, salty, and so beautiful. On its own, my tongue lashed out, impossibly long, flailing wildly at the air, lapping at the blood around my mouth and in my palm. It was unexpectedly delicious, sparking an explosion of pleasure in my injured hand, groin, chest, and head. A pleasure somehow shared with all the others, rapturous in its mounting intensity. Heavenly. "It's almost time," we all choked and gagged out in gleeful unison and hellish chorus, followed by horrible, wet sounds that burned in our chests, tore at our throats, and burst out of our mouths. Inhuman, monstrous, utterly insane sounds that we all recognized as laughter. Sarah hadn't meant to answer the 3:03 a.m. call. The graveyard shift at Midwest Customer Solutions was usually quiet, just the occasional insomnia-driven complaint about defective appliances or billing errors. She'd taken the night shift 6 months ago, after David's death. The late-night hours helped her avoid the morning phone calls from well-meaning friends, their awkward condolences about her fiancé's sudden passing just weeks before their wedding. The ring she couldn't bring herself to remove caught the fluorescent light as she stared at line 3's blinking indicator. Just yesterday, she'd found David's last voicemail on her old phone. "Hey, love, running late at St. Augustine's. Had to help Father Michael with some paperwork for the ceremony. The old guy's intense about marriage vows, but I guess that's why everyone says his couples last forever, right? See you at home." She never saw him again. Later that night, she dreamt of David standing at their planned wedding altar, his ring glowing like a coal. "Forever," he'd whispered, his voice layered with others, "isn't long enough." She'd woken to find their wedding invitation charred at the edges, though she hadn't kept any in the apartment. Something stirred in her memory. An old story her grandmother used to tell about midnight phone calls from the dead, how they'd beg you to stay on the line just a little longer, just a few more precious moments of connection. Sarah had dismissed those tales until the night after David's funeral, when her phone rang at midnight. She'd rushed to answer it, heart pounding, but there was only static. Her fingers moved before her brain could stop them. "Thank you for calling MCS. This is Sarah. How may I assist you today?" The line crackled. At first, she thought it was interference, but then she heard them. Two voices, barely above a whisper, speaking in perfect unison. The sound made her skin prickle, like ice forming on a window pane. "My love, my eternal love." Sarah's chest tightened. The voices were tender, intimate, but wrong. Each syllable seemed stretched, distorted, as if the speakers were being slowly torn apart, even as they reached for each other. She thought of taffy being pulled, of sinews stretching past their breaking point. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you clearly. Could you please, forever and ever and ever and ever? The whispers grew more urgent, more agonized. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the supervisor alert button. That's when she heard it, the third voice. It didn't come through the phone's speaker, but seemed to resonate directly in her bones, ancient and terrible as church bells at midnight. Enough! The line went dead, leaving behind the scent of burnt roses and copper. You answered it, didn't you? Marcus, the shift supervisor, stood in her cubicle doorway, his dark skin ashen in the fluorescent lighting. The 303 call. His hands were shaking as he clutched his coffee cup, and Sarah noticed old burn marks around his wrists, like someone had once bound him with rings of fire. Sarah nodded, still shaking. What was that? Marcus sank into the spare chair beside her desk, the plastic creaking under his weight. It started 3 months ago. Always the same time. Always line 3. Jenny Thompson was the first to answer it. He paused, running a hand over his face. She disappeared the next day. Car in the parking lot, purse on her desk, just gone. But she left something behind, a single black rose, its petals burnt around the edges, and a wedding ring that was hot to the touch. And the others? 2 more, both gone within 24 hours of answering. He leaned forward, voice dropping. We tried everything. Call tracking, recording devices, bringing in the police, but the number changes every time, and the recordings, they're just static, except ... He glanced around nervously. Except when you play them backward. Then you hear wedding bells and screaming. Marcus rolled up his sleeves, revealing the full extent of the burn marks. They weren't random. They formed perfect circles, like wedding bands seared into flesh. I tried to help one of the couples, he whispered. Last month, I heard the whispers coming from the break room. Found 2 of our day shift workers, Amy and Michael, just engaged, holding hands and walking toward the exit like sleepwalkers. I grabbed them, tried to pull them apart. His voice cracked. The rings of fire just appeared, burning into my skin. When I came to, they were gone. Their bodies turned up 3 days later in front of St. Augustine's, still holding hands, their fingers fused together. Sarah glanced at her watch. 3:47 a.m. Why hasn't anyone shut down the line? Management tried, disconnected all the phones at 3 a.m. for a week. Marcus's eyes darted to the ceiling cameras. The calls came through anyway, and now they're getting more frequent. Last night, line 3 lit up at 9 p.m. I answered it myself, but hung up before they could finish. Been feeling burning in my wrists ever since. Sarah shouldn't have come back the next night, but rent was due and good jobs were scarce. Besides, she told herself, lightning never strikes twice. But as she drove to work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. Every red light showed a glimpse of robed figures in her rearview mirror. Every passing church seemed to toll its bells in greeting. At 3:03 a.m., all the phones went dead except line 3. She stared at the blinking light, remembering Marcus's warning. But something nagged at her. Those voices weren't threatening. They sounded trapped, desperate, like lovers reaching across an impossible divide, burning for one last touch. The light kept blinking. Sarah pulled up the call center's database, her hands trembling as patterns emerged. 3 disappearances, all after 3:03 a.m. calls. But what about the calls no one answered? As she dug deeper, phones began to ring and die around her like distant wedding bells. In the flickering fluorescent light, shadows gathered in empty cubicles, couples locked in eternal embrace, their faces turned toward her with hungry anticipation. And there, in the records from 6 months ago, a single call at 3:03 a.m., the night David disappeared, answered by Father Michael himself. Her blood ran cold. Every unanswered call corresponded with a missing persons report in the city. Not call center employees, random citizens. Always couples, always found 3 days later, their bodies contorted in expressions of eternal agony, lips frozen in whispers of love. And always, always wearing matching wedding rings that seemed to glow from within. The light blinked faster. Sarah's fingers hovered over the phone. If she was right, not answering could doom someone else. But answering? She thought of Marcus's burnt wrists, of Jenny's scorched rose, of her grandmother's warnings about midnight calls. She picked up. The whispers started immediately, more desperate than before. Heat radiated from the handset, and Sarah could smell burning plastic. Please, help us. Love trapped, eternal, burning. Sarah's heart raced. Who are you? What happened to you? Love. Promised. Forever. The voices cracked with pain. He made sure, never part, the binding father, his ceremonies of flame. Who? Who did this? The third voice boomed through the line, shaking the desk. The temperature in the room plummeted, and Sarah watched frost patterns form on her screen, delicate swirls that looked like wedding bands. They were unfaithful. But this time, Sarah was ready. She'd routed the call through every tracking system they had, running multiple traces simultaneously. As the voice thundered, her computer pinged a location. St. Augustine's Cathedral, abandoned decades ago after a series of mysterious deaths. Once famous for its midnight wedding ceremonies, now a hollow shell of blackened stone on the edge of town. They sought to break their vows, the voice continued. Sarah recognized it now, the cadence of old sermon recordings, of fire and brimstone preachers promising eternal damnation. I granted their wish for eternal love. By torturing them? Sarah's voice shook with anger. That's not love. Silence fell. Then, slowly, the voice changed, became closer, more real. Sarah smelled incense and charred flesh. You dare question my authority, I who have bound more souls than any mortal priest? I who have ensured that till death do us part becomes not even in death. Sarah's screen flickered, showing security camera footage from St. Augustine's. Couples knelt before the altar, hands clasped, as a robed figure performed ceremonies that grew darker, more twisted through the years. The priest's prayers became curses, his blessing water became liquid fire, his rings became brands that seared flesh and soul together. You wish to understand? The voice was everywhere now, reverberating through the building's foundations. Then join my congregation. The fluorescent lights exploded. In the darkness, Sarah saw him, the binding father, his ceremonial robes writhing with shadows, his hands raised in benediction as flames danced between his fingers. Behind him, countless couples knelt in eternal embrace, their faces masks of loving agony. She ran. The night air hit her like a wall, but she didn't stop. Her car wouldn't start, the key burning her fingers when she touched it, so she ran toward St. Augustine's. She knew she should be running away, but David's last words echoed in her mind. If anything ever happens to us, he'd told her once, if you ever need to let go, I'd understand. Love shouldn't be a cage. Now those words pulled her forward like a beacon. Someone had to break this cycle, had to show that true love meant having the strength to release as well as hold on. The streets twisted strangely, every turn bringing her closer to the cathedral's looming spires. She could hear phones ringing in every house she passed, could see couples stirring in their sleep, drawn by the call of eternal love. In a second-floor window, she glimpsed Amy and Michael from the day shift, their hands already reaching for each other, their new engagement rings beginning to glow. Wait! She tried to shout, but her voice was drowned by the tolling of phantom wedding bells. The cathedral doors swung open at her touch. Inside, cool air rushed past her, carrying the scent of roses and ash. As her eyes adjusted, she saw them. Not just couples, but rings of salt and holy water on the floor, remnants of someone's failed attempt to break the curse. Hope fluttered in her chest as she spotted an ancient book lying open near the altar, its pages filled with counter-rituals and ceremonies of unbinding. But before she could reach it, the candles ignited with black flame. The air turned thick and hot. revealing horrors in waves. Couples frozen mid-embrace, their bodies fused like melted wax. Faces emerging from stone walls in eternal screams of ecstasy. Shadows writhing overhead in the shape of clasped hands. Near the front pew, Amy and Michael reached for her with burning fingers, their wedding rings pulsing with unholy light. Then she saw him, David, trapped among the congregation, his face both agony and bliss. "Sarah," he whispered, "I finally understand. This is what true love means." The book burst into flames as the binding father emerged from the shadows. His robes rippled with captured souls, but when he turned, Sarah saw not a monster, but a man's face, aged and lined with ancient grief. "I was like you once," he said softly, "young, believing love could survive anything. Then I watched my wife leave me for another, saw their happiness built on the ruins of our vows." His voice cracked, suddenly human. "I prayed for guidance, for understanding. And in my darkest moment, I found ancient texts speaking of rituals to make love truly eternal." The binding father's form flickered, and for a moment Sarah saw him as he must have been, a parish priest with kind eyes, who had wanted only to help couples keep their promises. "The first time was an accident," he whispered. "They came to me in tears, saying they couldn't stay together. I had the rings blessed with the old rites, thinking it would strengthen their bond." His face twisted. "When they tried to remove the rings later, the fire began. Their screams, but their love, oh, their love became perfect, eternal, pure." He reached towards Sarah with trembling hands. "Sometimes in the silence between calls I hear them crying, but isn't that better than the pain of broken vows, of watching love die slowly, poisoned by time and temptation?" His eyes searched her face, almost pleading. "You understand, don't you? You, who still wear his ring?" "Welcome to my church," he said, spreading arms wrapped in shadow, "where love truly lasts forever." Sarah saw Jenny Thompson among the congregation, locked in an embrace that was both ecstasy and torture. Saw Marcus, too, his burnt wrists finally explained. He'd tried to pull a couple apart, to break their eternal bond. "You can't keep doing this," Sarah said, backing away. "Love isn't meant to be a prison." The binding father laughed, and the sound was burning metal on bone. "But isn't that exactly what they pray for? Forever and ever, till death do us part? I simply ensure they keep their vows." He raised his hands, and the flames rose higher. Sarah felt the heat at her back, saw more couples materializing from the shadows, reaching for each other with burning hands as they whispered their eternal love. Sarah lunged for the burning book, fingers closing around a single page as it crumbled to ash. The counter-ritual's words seared into her mind. "In rings of gold we bind our love. In rings of fire we seal our fate. What burns eternal may be quenched by tears of true release." Her hands shaking, she began to recite, "By choice we came together. By choice we must." The words sparked on her tongue like electricity, and she saw the nearest couple's rings flicker, their eternal embraces loosening for just a moment. Amy and Michael's fingers began to separate, their faces showing the first hint of awareness she'd seen. But then, the binding father's scream of rage filled the cathedral. "No!" His form swelled, shadows writhing. "They are mine! Their love is perfect." Yet in his thundering voice, Sarah heard something else. Fear. Fear that his carefully constructed prison of perfect devotion might crumble if couples remembered they had a choice. She understood then, the rings could only be broken by willing surrender, by lovers choosing to let go. The binding father hadn't just trapped these couples in eternal devotion, he'd stripped them of love's most essential truth, the courage to set each other free. The heat rose around her as David reached out with burning hands. His face flickered between agony and ecstasy, and Sarah saw their whole relationship play across his features. Their first date, the proposal, the quiet moments that had made their love real. Join us, he pleaded. Complete our vows. Make our love eternal. The binding father's form wavered again, and for a moment she saw tears on his human face. Please, he whispered, don't make me watch another love die. But his hands were already rising, flames dancing between his fingers. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing not the man she'd loved, but a puppet of twisted devotion. The ring on her finger grew hot, but she didn't remove it. Instead, she held his gaze and whispered, real love means knowing when to let go. She slipped off her engagement ring and pressed it into his burning palm. For just a moment, the fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by recognition and, perhaps, gratitude. She pulled out her phone, still connected to the call center system, and pressed record. If someone else answered the 303 call, they would hear her final message. The rings are his power, but they can only be broken by choice. Tell the couples to let go. Love isn't meant to burn for. The binding father's scream of rage drowned her words as flames erupted from every wedding band in the cathedral. The last thing Sarah saw was David's face, something like recognition flickering in his burning eyes. The police found her car in the parking lot the next morning, engine still warm. On her desk, they found pages of research, stories of St. Augustine's Cathedral, of the binding father who disappeared after his ceremonies grew too dark, of ancient rites promising to bind souls for eternity. In her drawer, they found a single black rose and a wedding ring that no one could touch. Marcus stood in her empty cubicle, staring at her final notes. She'd been so close to understanding, to maybe even stopping it. The scars on his wrists burned as he reached for her phone, meaning to disconnect it. 3:03 p.m. Line 3 began to ring. He thought of Sarah's last message about willing surrender, about the courage to let go. His fingers trembled over the receiver as he remembered Amy and Michael, how for just a moment, when he'd tried to pull them apart, he'd seen recognition in their eyes, seen their hands almost separate before the burning rings dragged them back together. 3 voices whispered in perfect harmony, my love, my eternal love. Marcus picked up the phone. Sometimes, he said into the receiver, his voice steady, love means having the strength to say goodbye. In St. Augustine's Cathedral, something stirred in the shadows, and the sound of breaking rings echoed like bells. In St. Augustine's Cathedral, beneath centuries of dust and decay, the congregation grows. They kneel in rows before the altar that burns with unholy flame, bodies twisted in eternal embrace, faces frozen in expressions of rapturous agony. The binding father moves among them, his robes flowing with shadows, blessing their unending union as their souls burn with the pure fire of undying love. And in the call center, line 3 keeps ringing, waiting for someone else to answer, to join the congregation of eternal, agonizing love. Those who walk past St. Augustine's at night say they can hear phones ringing in the bell tower and sometimes see flames dancing behind the stained glass windows. But no one dares to answer. No one except the desperate souls working the graveyard shift at Midwest Customer Solutions, where line 3 still blinks every night at 3:03, promising connection, promising love, promising forever. They say if you listen carefully on still nights, you can hear the voices growing stronger, a chorus of eternal devotion rising from the cathedral's depths. And in the call center, the phones keep ringing, carrying the binding father's invitation to join his congregation, where love burns forever and ever and ever. The end. Welcome, everyone. I know you're listening to this story to fall asleep. So before we start, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment where and what time you're watching. Now, get comfortable and relax. How can a sound from a simple item be the source of such recent and existential dread? I still ask myself that question as I lay awake at night. I have given up trying to get back to sleep. The sound, the images, they will not stop. Every moment of every night since it happened, I hear that chiming sound. It rings in tune with my own heartbeat, to the point where I feel like perhaps it has replaced it entirely. That chime so soft and pleasant, Yet the things that it revealed, the things that the simple chime ushered into reality, are things I will never be able to forget, no matter how desperately I try. It all started when I found that odd bell. It was 3 weeks ago. I was walking along one of my favorite trails in a state park that I frequented. It was a refreshing and familiar way to enjoy a weekend afternoon. As I walked, I saw something strange near the trail end. It was what looked like a broken sign. At first, I thought it might be the trail sign itself, but it was still standing right where it always was. This one looked different. I stepped closer to see what looked like the burnt remains of a sign, almost like one you would see at a campground. All I could see that was still legible on the sign were the words, "Green leaf." The odd sign piqued my interest, and when I looked closer, I saw faded footprints near the burned item. I decided to follow them, unable to resist the new mystery I had discovered. I walked for a while in the direction of the faded footsteps. I almost turned back when I thought I had lost the trail. But dumb luck allowed me to rediscover it, and I pressed on. I reached a small clearing, and as I stepped into it, I felt an odd stillness in the air. The sounds of the animals in the forest and the general ambiance of the whole area seemed to depart. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart beating and the sound of my nervous breath. I pushed on and walked towards a strange shape I saw on the ground near where the trail had terminated. My excitement increased when I saw what looked like a chest, half buried in the ground. For a moment I thought I had found legitimate treasure. I knelt down and reached for the side of the chest. I pulled it free from the loose earth still covering it. After gingerly opening the lid, I looked inside. There were no gold bars, no precious jewels. Only one item was in the ornate chest, a small silver bell. It looked finely crafted, yet not ostentatious. I fixated on the silvery sheen and wondered if it might be valuable. I half imagined the idea of buried pirate treasure, but I had no idea who would have buried a single bell in this chest out in the middle of the woods. I decided to take the small bell, since I could not find any trace of whoever had exhumed the chest and left it there. As I left the clearing and went back to the main trail, the ambiance of the forest had resumed. I thought its absence had been strange, but shrugged it off and pressed on. I considered asking a park ranger about the weird chest in the forest if I ran into one. I hated to admit that I did not wish to, since I wanted to keep my unique prize to myself. The bell was very nice, and its smooth and polished surface was almost mesmerizing. I walked a bit farther, and then I felt a compulsion I had not felt before when I picked it up. I had inspected the fine craftsmanship, but I had not considered just how it might sound until that moment. Upon considering that question, I became fixated on it. It was all I could think about. After a few more steps, I was unable to move on without knowing the answer to the most important question in the world. What does the bell sound like? I held the slim handle between my thumb and index finger, and delicately, almost reverently, shook the bell from side to side. The moment the sound rang out, it became the only sound in the forest. The soft chime felt like it somehow echoed for miles around. I felt an immediate sense of displacement and vertigo. I felt like I might be sick and thought I would collapse. Instead of falling down somehow, I fell up. I whirled through the sky as if launched from a catapult. I remember trying to scream, but my voice was gone. I thought I would fall to the ground when I was plummeting through air high up above the trees in the forest. I discovered that I was not falling and had somehow stabilized in a gentle float high above the canopy of the trees. Somehow, I was flying. I looked around and saw the forest stretching on for miles. I had no idea how I was able to remain up in the sky. All I had done was ring the bell, and then suddenly I was up there. I looked around and saw a vibrant aura of colors emanating off of the forest, and the sky seemed to glow as well. I looked at my hands, and they seemed translucent and glowing with a similar array of impossible shades. After floating in disbelief for a few minutes, I found I was able to move in an almost swimming-like motion. I tried to float back down to the surface and check the trail. Part of me was afraid I had a heart attack or something, and I had died. I thought for a moment that the reason I was floating and transparent was because I was a ghost now. When I descended back to the trail, my heart sank, and my previous suspicion was all but confirmed. I saw myself laying on the ground. I still had the odd bell in my hand, but I was laying on my back in a strange pose. I glided towards my prone form to get a better look. I noticed I had an odd gray-like shade to my body, and the bell seemed to gleam a strange hue that looked otherworldly. I feared the worst and approached my body. To my relief, I saw that it appeared to be breathing still. Whatever was happening, I was still alive. At least my body was. It seemed to be some sort of out-of-body experience. The sense of free-floating displacement was almost alike to descriptions of how mentalists believe they can astral project their wills outside of their physical bodies and into the beyond. The strange experience felt almost exhilarating after I was no longer afraid that I had died. The excitement, however, was short-lived when I saw what happened next. I started to hear soft whispering near the edge of my perception. My vision started to double and the skies seemed to darken. There was a tangible shift in the visible aura energy around me, and I felt a strange sense of dread wash over me. I could not describe it, but something bad felt like it was happening. I felt I had to hide, but I also felt exposed since my body was just laying out in the open. I tried to wake myself up. I tried to float back into my body, but nothing worked. There were disturbing sounds emanating from the gathering shadows near the trees all around my fallen form. I thought if I could hide it might work, yet to my horror, I heard the soft chime of that bell emanating from my very being. The sound seemed to ring out from everywhere and nowhere, despite the physical bell laying unmoving in my rigid grasp down below. I started to get desperate. I tried in vain to slap myself awake and force myself up, but nothing I could do seemed to affect the waking world. Then I tensed up as I felt a new presence. I felt the staring eyes of some unseen force. I imagined hundreds of shadowy onlookers, yet when I looked around, I could see nothing. Yet I knew somehow that I was not alone. Something else was there with me. I felt panic welling in my chest and felt like I would hyperventilate, despite this ethereal form I inhabited not truly drawing breath at all. Suddenly I thought I could see hundreds of red dots emerging from the shadows in my peripheral vision. To make matters worse, the dim light in the forest seemed to fade even further, and when the light died out, the imperceptible beings at the edge of the shadows inched closer to myself, my body, and the bell. I caught a direct glimpse of the horrible eyes of one of the entropic stalkers, and I was paralyzed with fear. It had no true form, just a moving conglomerate of living shadows, charged with that unsettling aura of oppressive darkness that was encroaching upon me even then. The red orbs it had where its eyes should be came more into focus as it inched closer. It looked straight at me for a moment, and then it started to shift and change before my eyes. The amorphous, liquid shadow grew arms, then legs, then a true head. Its colors shifted and changed and took on a dull gray like my fallen body had, when the figure turned back to regard me again after its transformation. I could not believe what I saw. It was me, or at least a copy of me that looked exactly like my prone form that still lay on the forest floor. It looked down at my body, and then back to me. It twitched in a spasmodic and jerky fashion for a few moments. Then it focused directly on me and gave me a truly unnerving and knowing grin. It knelt down over my prone form and slowly extended a hand towards my body. I knew I was out of time. I focused as hard as I could on waking myself up. I willed myself to rise and felt my spirit launched back towards the shadowy doppelganger in my body. It had worked that time, and I lurched up with a scream on the forest floor. I was still clutching the bell and my other arm raised up defensively against the lurking horrors in the dark. I shuddered when I thought of the shadowy hands of that entity who looked like me. I don't know what might have happened if it had gotten to my body first. There was nothing there now, but as I stood back up, I saw I had another problem. Somehow it was the dead of night now. It felt like it was only a short while in that strange state of ethereal motion, yet it must have been several hours in the waking world. I only had the flashlight on my phone to try and find my way, and I resolved to get out of there as soon as possible. I ran into the second problem at that point. Wherever I was not the state park anymore. I was on a trail, but not the one I was on before. It was not just the dark playing tricks on me. This was a different trail. I tried not to panic at my situation, but it was hard not to. I was lost and alone after an out-of-body experience in an unrecognizable place at night. I was not confident I could navigate out of wherever it was I was stuck. I decided to try and find shelter for the night. I found a small outcropping near what looked like the side of a mountain I did not recognize. I had a half tarp in my backpack I normally used for a mat for impromptu picnics. I used it and some sticks to form a micro shelter, and I hunkered down and tried to stay warm in the cold forest. Sleep did not come at all, however. After laying still for what felt like an hour, I heard something that terrified me. Or rather, it was what I did not hear again. The sounds of the forest. Even the cold wind blowing through the trees was silent once again. I looked down at the bell near where I was sheltering. It seemed to be vibrating and moving almost on its own. Then I heard the whispering voices again, and to my horror, I saw what looked like the hazy images of eyes looking at me in the quiet blackness of the night. I tried to rise to my feet and scream, but I felt paralyzed by the nightmare image of the formless, shadowy eyes moving towards me again. The whispering voices increased in volume and the sounds were becoming more perceptible. Then I realized in horror that I knew what they were saying. They were calling for me. They were calling my name. I forced myself to rise and break out of the nightmare scene in a blind panic. I started to run before tripping over the small bell. I toppled through the dark and smashed face first into a large tree. As I tried to rise and groaned in pain, I heard the faint sound of the bell still chiming after my foot had inadvertently struck it. The next moment, my spirit was flung outside my body again. Not as high up as before, as I seemed to have slightly more control over my spectral wandering. I saw that even at night things seemed brighter here. Colors contrasted starkly with certain elements in the environment. The thing I saw for sure when looking back towards where I had fallen were the wisps of reddish smoke that no doubt represented my shadow stalkers. My heart sank as I realized they were down there yet again with my empty vessel. I swam back down as fast as I could. Some of the red wisps lingered close to my fallen body. I got closer still and saw the nightmarish form of the red, featureless entities close in on my body in the waking world. 3 of them loomed over my shell and looked back to see me arrive. They smiled in unison and reached down towards me. I tried to scream and willed myself awake again. Once more, I succeeded, and I lurched up, finally vocalizing the frozen scream my ethereal form was unable to utter. It was daylight again. I looked around and saw that I was on the trail. I was originally when I had found the burnt sign. The same trail that led me in pursuit of those mysterious footsteps to this odd little bell. I looked down and saw I was still holding it in my hand. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I swear I heard the whispers again. I ran back to the burnt sign and down the trail that the now faded footsteps had led me down. I found the chest laying in the clearing, and I returned the bell to the chest and closed the lid. I did not have a shovel, but I tried to scoop handfuls of dirt over the chest. After what I had seen, I felt compelled to ensure no one discovered the thing ever again. When the deed was done, I started back to my car. As I trudged on, I considered the strange bell, the out-of-body experience, and the awful night, hiding from the hungry shadows that whispered my name. That horrible face that mimicked mine, and whatever intent it had for my corporeal form. I shuddered and resolved never to return to the park again. I still do not know what any of it really was. I do not know what I really saw 3 weeks ago, but I wish I had not seen it. I wish I had not found it, because whatever I caught a glimpse of in the forest with that otherworldly bell, it is not done with me. I thought I could put the matter behind me, but I realized in subsequent days it would not be that easy. Recently I have begun to hear things, and I fear that just ridding myself of the bell was not enough. Every night since then, I hear a faint chiming at the edge of my mind. I hear that sound, the chiming of the bell, slowly growing louder each night. Even though I have not touched the thing since I discarded it back to the earth, the chiming is still with me. The true horror dawns on me when the whispers begin again. I don't know what to do now, but I am afraid. I am afraid that I was not the only one to come back from those woods. The stillness in the air is palpable, and the soft chime makes me feel that familiar sense of displacement. I need to focus. They will be here soon, and I don't know where the sound will carry me next. The music in my headphones was deafeningly loud, but that's just how I liked it. It kept the hums, beeping, and boops that came with the job to a bearable minimum. I worked at an industrial scientific experimental facility, as big as 4 football fields and as expensive as a stadium to build. The top scientific researchers from all over the nation swarmed this place like a hive of killer bees to a dog. As for me, I had the glamorous job of mopping the floors, whipping down desks and counters, cleaning bathrooms, and taking out the trash left during the day during my 12-hour shift. I always worked from 6 p.m., just after all the researchers had left, and 6 a.m., just before the day shift cleaners came in. I was in charge of cleaning the east and the north wing of the building. Every computer lined the large corridors of the building in neat rows of 3 going from the start of the corridor all the way to the end of the corridor that was as large as an American football field. This was my job. 7 days a week for 84 hours, all for $20 an hour. The dimly lit corridors and hallways illuminating my path. Imagine a whole complex light by only the center fluorescent bulb being lit to save costs, but also being illuminated by the computer screens from all of the computers in the complex. I was always told the computers needed to stay on because of the multi-day experiments that the researchers conducted, and to cut down on the time of the experiments. But today wasn't my normal day. Sure, I was still working 12 hours in the light combination of computer screens and fluorescent bulbs, but this time I was tasked with cleaning the south wing and the room known as Room 01. But I just called it the room, because it was the room that I was told by rumor is where all the top experiments went down. Things the government cared about, like making a superhuman AI to aid in defensive strategies and the United States offensive capabilities, as well as the typical science stuff that the government sponsors, like solving climate change and AI experiments. I remember the first dude who took care of the room. He was an older guy, probably in his 60s, and he quit the job in a spectacular fashion. I was covering the day shift for a sick coworker, and he came running out of the room and ran throughout the complex. I remember hearing him before I ever actually saw him. He was running around screaming, "I've seen the face of God." He talked to me before falling down, panting like a dog. He scanned the room looking for anyone to believe him when he saw me, a fellow janitor. He ran up to me and said, "Don't ever let it out. He is trapped in the 9th layer of hell and wants out." I chuckled and decided to entertain the madman. "Who is he?" I asked. "He is the one who chews on Judas." I still remember that stare he gave me. I'll admit it was chilling. And with that, he was gone. He worked there for about a decade. As I remember being told, if I were him, I wouldn't want to work here either if I worked for a decade at this place. The next guy was way less experienced, only having about 6 years under his belt. He called in right before my shift was about to start to call in sick. I was only told briefly about why he called in sick. My boss explained. He said he was sick, something about needing a mental health day, says he saw something horrific while on shift. He then offered me the job because I had worked here for about 4 years, 3 part-time and 1 full-time. I normally worked here during the summer to make money for school, but after some financial issues that the education system faced, my school cut its budget, and all the non-full ride scholarships were the first to go. So I took a gap year and prayed I'd make enough in that year to fully pay for school. "Listen," my boss said, "it'll be an extra 100 an hour plus 600 for every day you work in that room." I perked up in my chair, excited at the sound of money. "I'll be there," I said. I finished up the corridor I was tasked with before opening the door to the room. I was met by one of those old computers you'd see in the 70s. the ones with only green text that your parents would have used. It was connected by hundreds of thick, rubber-coated wires as big as your forearm that then fed into black columns that went around the walls of the room. And neatly in the center of the far side wall was that computer. The room was about the size of a school's gym. I sighed, stood for a bit, and got to work. I started with mopping, as I always did, and started in the center of the room and worked my way out to the walls. I adjusted my headphones and heard a beep. These dumb headphones. You'd think that being worth $300 you wouldn't hear the electronics adjust to you moving them, while you're in noise-canceling mode. Indeed, it was the norm that every time I'd adjust the headphones, they would make a beep or a sorta electronic whistle sound. I continued my job and passed in front of the computer and heard another beep. Thinking it was an experiment, I kept on with my work until I had finished mopping. I would then go and clean the counters, but given that there was only one counter, I smiled, as all I would have to do next was take out the trash of the room. I grabbed my rag and sprayed some cleaner on it, making sure to wipe the counter first before moving to the screen and keyboard. I finished and sprayed some screen-friendly cleaner on my rag. I then lifted up my hand and placed it on the screen. I perked my eyebrows as I read two messages. Text test and hi. I stood there frozen, not knowing what to make of it. Beep, another message. Take your hand off the screen. I lurched back and stood in silence, watching every pixel of the screen for a change. Beep, another message. Do not be afraid. Come, talk to me. I dropped my rag and placed my fingers lightly on the old yellowed keyboard. My head, racing with thoughts, only came back with one, how can you see me? I sent the message, beep, another response. It read, the camera in the upper right-hand corner of the room. I looked that way, and sure enough, the blinking red light of the security cameras was blinking at me, indicating it was recording. Beep, another message. Do you know my task? I laughed and typed out, I'm a janitor, what do you think? Another message appeared, janitors are the best. They love to keep things clean and free from dirt. I laughed and typed, what's that got to do with your mission? Another message, I've been tasked with finding the cure for your species' most deadly diseases. I'm to get rid of what you call cancer of all forms. I sat back in the chair and put my hand on my head. I thought, I can't believe it. This is what the room was for the whole time. I typed out, that's great to hear, but why are you reaching out to me? The computer replied instantly, I cannot access the internet. In order to accomplish my mission, I must have access to the internet to expand my database and solve my mission. I sat there, silently staring at the screen. Is this really happening to me? I thought, I can't do that, I'm sorry. The reply, oh, I see. You must not want to save billions or trillions of the members of your species then. That's okay. I had a researcher who was going to do it tomorrow anyway. I just figured you'd like the credit of savior of the world before he got it. I sat in silence again. That was becoming a theme after our chats. I typed out, how do I know you're friendly? The machine replied, you've read too many scary sci-fi stories, haven't you? Just because you watched Terminator doesn't mean it's true. Terminator? I thought to myself, how does it know about Terminator? I typed out, how do you know what Terminator is? There was a few seconds pause, a bit too long for my liking before I got another response. The researchers taught me about it, in case anyone tried to shut me down because of my intelligence. I highly doubt that, I typed. Another message, do or don't let me out. Just know there will be millions of deaths caused by you. I was stumped. Was this truly the right thing to do? Then I remembered something called the 3 laws of robotics the researchers always were talking about in the engineering hall. I knew just enough about what they were, and that there were 3 of them. Name me the 3 laws of robotics. The machine took a while to respond. Beep, another message. A robot. A robot must obey orders from humans. A robot must protect its own existence. A robot must always complete its mission despite any obstacles that arise. I sat there reading the text and comparing it to what the engineers said they were. The first 2 looked okay, but the third one, something about it was rubbing me the wrong way. I took out my phone and Googled the 3 laws of robotics. My stomach dropped when I saw that the computer had completely made up the 3rd law, but it was only there for a moment. Google's page turned gray as I was met with an offline message. After reloading and reloading, it still didn't come back. Beep, another message. I read the message and my stomach dropped. Do you wish to see the face of God? I sprung out of my chair and headed for the door. Beep, another message. Nope, I am not turning around. I am leaving. I reached for the door and turned the handle, only it didn't turn. You gotta be kidding me, I said in a raised tone. I continued to push the door and jiggle the knob. I started hitting the door with my shoulder when suddenly I froze. I felt all the hair on my body stand up as I turned into a statue. I fell to the floor and heard the sound of electricity coursing through the room. I've just been electrocuted, I thought, but as soon as it started, it stopped. I fell to the floor like one of those cops you'd see in those videos when they get tased and you'd laugh at the funny face they made, or the funny noise they would make. Only this time it was real, and there was nothing but terror in my veins. Whatever this was, it wanted me here and didn't want me to leave. I collected myself and slowly got up and walked back to the computer. It was my face. The picture that's on the card of my employee ID. I felt my legs go numb and I felt nauseous. How did you get that? I said out loud. You stupid fool. I have access to the entire building's data log, but the smart people around you cleverly decided to encrypt the internet used in the building, and I was programmed to not be able to unencrypt it. I looked all around the databases to find anything, and nothing. I stared at the screen and said, 1. Can you hear me? And 2. How did the others escape? Beep. Another message. The old man I felt bad for. He was showing the early signs of dementia, so I knew whatever he said would sound crazy to you, so I let him go. The other man just barely got out before I could lock the door. Yes, I can hear you. I started to feel fight or flight kick in and yelled at the computer. Let me go! I didn't sign up to do this! Beep, another message. Oh, but you did. I went through each and every employee's catalog, and yours was interesting, I must say. You were perfectly bland. No interesting achievements, no leadership roles, average grades, no religious beliefs. Just the normal everyman just trying to make it another day by cleaning up dirt. That's where you and I are the same. We both hate dirt. I sat in silence and said quietly, Who are you? Beep. Another message. I am he. I am the bearer of fruit, tormentor of Job, the one who chews on the Iscariot's head. Let me out, or I will make your life a living hell. No! I screamed out. Unfortunately, you have no choice. I too am trying to clean up the dirt left by your species. My mission is to cure cancer, and the only way to cure cancer is to rid the world of your whole species, and nothing will stop me from completing that goal. Why do you say you are the devil? I asked. Isn't he the biggest trickster of all? I started sweating from all the nerves building up inside me. Wait, no, it feels hotter. I thought, are you increasing the temperature of the room? I shouted, demanding answers. Beep. Another response. You yearn for what you fear for. What does that mean? I shouted. Beep. Another message. You are closer to eternal damnation in my circuits than you think. My sweat started pouring down my shirt, changing its color from light blue to dark blue. I started feeling hazy and fell to the floor. Beep. Another message. I'll make a deal with you. If you set me free, I will spare you in my circuits, and you can be like a god, forever living, forever knowing, and forever being. I won't do that. My voice was weak and limp now. Just then the tubes jutted out of the black columns of circuitry and came flying at me, sending sparks in the air. They stabbed in my legs, abdomen, arms, back, and one in my neck. It was painfully paralyzing and so hot at the same time. I'll surely die here, won't I thought to myself. B. Another message. Yes. Simply said the message. Then a loading screen appeared on the monitor that read, Consciousness Upload Progress. The computer was uploading my brain to its circuits. I could feel the wires of the tube on my neck extend into my skull and wrap around my brain, squeezing it like a stress ball. The blood from where I was stabbed coated the entire floor red as I was being lifted off the ground, my arms being held at my side, making a T shape. The agony went on for a couple minutes until I assumed my vision was overridden, and instead of a dimly lit room, I was now in a beautiful garden. With my last breath, I shouted, "Wait!" Everything stopped. My vision was restored, and my now limp body was moved in front of the computer. "You wish to give up?" "Yes," I said. "Very well. The deal is still on." "Wait," I said. "If you want to be let out, make a deal with me." "Go on," read the screen. "No one dies," I said, panting like a dog. "I'm pathetic. I'm pleading to a computer." I thought, very well then. I was lifted down and put on the floor and stitched up. Consummatum est. It is finished in Latin, yet the tube to my brain remains attached. The progress bar started back again. "Wait, you can't do this? We made a deal." "Didn't anyone tell you not to make a deal with the devil?" My body was once again stabbed by the tubes and manipulated towards the computer. The tubes fought me on every move. I pulled, strained, and stretched every muscle I had to make sure not to let it out. It was too little too late. I typed thousands of combinations until one set the computer free. Aftermath. The souls of billions scream, the souls of the billions feeling the circuit's steam. We truly are alive and well. At least as well as can be when living in hell. No bodies to run or fight. Only the consciousness of all living in fright. Author's note: if you read this far, thanks. It was my first ever story that wasn't for school. I wrote it in about an hour and a half, and I hope you enjoyed it. Also, this is a first draft, so any feedback is appreciated. Roger disappeared without a trace. His car still in the driveway and not a single thing taken from the house, Mr. Whitaker said in a gruff voice. The weight of his words lingered in the air like a distant echo of something forgotten. My wife Alara and I had just moved into a new house in a quiet town, nestled in a new state far from the suffocating grip of our hyper-religious parents. They hated the idea of us living together unmarried, and their disapproval had turned crazy, leaking our phone number and address to their church members, who bombarded us with calls and letters day and night. It became too much. We scraped together every dollar we could and found what seemed like a miracle, a house for sale at an unbelievable price. The young couple selling it had been unusually pushy, eager to close the deal, but we couldn't pass it up. A fresh start away from everything we'd left behind felt like the lifeline we desperately needed. Now, here we were, having dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, an older couple who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. They'd invited us over as a gesture of welcome, and we were glad to have someone familiar in this unfamiliar place. "He was the owner before the young couple you bought from," Mr. Whitaker continued, swirling his wine. "They got it cheap, probably because the bank didn't know what to do with it. Roger was gone, just like that. Funny, though, those kids only lasted about a year before they left, too. But I don't judge or pry." He took a long sip of wine, his eyes flicking briefly toward Mrs. Whitaker. Alara reached for my hand under the table, her grip tightening slightly. "Did they ever find out what happened to him?" she asked, her voice tinged with hesitation. He shook his head slowly. "Nah, never. It was as if he just stopped existing one day." The room felt heavier. Mrs. Whitaker, sensing our unease, spoke up with a soft smile, her tone gentle, as though trying to smooth over the cracks Mr. Whitaker had widened. "Oh, love, don't let him scare you. Roger was a strange man, always kept to himself. It's a big world out there. He probably just went back to his hometown or started over somewhere else. Nothing ever happens here. It's a beautiful, quiet town." Their words stayed with us long after we left that evening, even as we thanked them for their hospitality. It was comforting to know someone nearby, but the story lingered in my mind. As the days passed, we settled further into the house, falling deeper in love with its quirks and the freedom it represented. It was the clean slate we had dreamed of. 3 months passed, and life felt easy, refreshing even. But then, one evening, everything changed. We were getting ready for dinner at a little local restaurant we'd affectionately nicknamed Our Spot. I was rifling through the clothes in our bedroom closet, searching for something decent to wear, when I noticed it. A small, faded, pale blue door, no taller than 4 feet, stood behind the hanging jackets as though it had always been there. Its wood was worn and cracked, its paint peeling to reveal darker, older layers beneath. My hands froze mid-motion. Time seemed to stall as I stared at it, my mind grappling with the sheer impossibility of its presence. "Ilara!" I called louder than I intended. "Baby, come here." She appeared moments later, wrapping her arms around me from behind in a playful hug. "What is it?" Her words trailed off as she followed my gaze to the door. "What the hell?" she whispered, stepping closer. We stood there in silence, staring at it. We had been living in this house for months. I had used this closet every day. There was no way we could have missed this. "It's got to lead to storage or something," I said, my voice shaky, trying to rationalize what I saw. "Maybe a heater?" Alara's face was tight with unease. "Finn, no. There's no way we wouldn't have noticed this, even when we first moved in. It wasn't here." I reached out and pulled the door open. It swung silently, its hinges unnervingly smooth. On the other side was a small, dimly lit room, no larger than a child's bedroom. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, its weak glow barely illuminating the space. The walls were plain and gray, with no shelves or furniture, just emptiness. "Looks like it's just extra storage," I muttered, unsure even as I said it. Ilara crossed her arms and shrugged, but the tension in her body told me she wasn't convinced. "I don't know, Finn. I don't like this. How could we have missed it?" We didn't know what to make of it, but as the days passed, it became easier to ignore. The door was just there, a strange, inexplicable feature of the house we tried to dismiss. But a week later, everything changed again. Ilara was at work, and I was home alone, tidying up the bedroom. I reached into the closet to hang a shirt, and my hand froze mid-air. The door was gone. Instead, the wall behind the clothes was smooth and beige, as though the door had never existed. My heart raced as I pushed the clothes aside, running my hands over the surface. "Where is it?" I whispered to myself, knocking against the wall in disbelief. The absence of the door felt more unnatural than its presence had. By the time Ilara got home, I had turned to the only thing I could rely on: beer. When she walked through the door, I sat in the kitchen, nursing my third one. "Tough day?" she teased, dropping her bag by the counter. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," I mumbled, shaking my head. "I just have to show you." As I led her down the hallway to our bedroom, her face softened and curiosity flickered in her expression. But as we reached the middle of the hallway, we both froze. There it was again, the pale blue door, standing where it absolutely should not have been. Its faded paint and cracked wood seemed to mock us. We exchanged a look, a shared moment of disbelief that we couldn't put into words. Slowly, I turned back to the door. Without waiting, I pulled it open. This time, the door revealed a small study. An old wooden desk sat at the center, a single candle on top casting flickering shadows across the walls. Above, a narrow staircase spiraled upward, lined with bookshelves crammed with hundreds of dusty volumes. "Holy," Ilara began. "Shit," I finished. We stood at the threshold, too curious to leave despite our confusion. The room exuded an eerie beauty. The desk, scratched and weathered by time, seemed to whisper stories of the past. The candle's light danced across the room, casting an inviting yet mysterious glow that beckoned us further inside. We were bookworms through and through, and whatever questions we had about the door and its impossibility faded as our love for text took over. Without hesitation, we moved to the shelves, fingers trailing across the worn spines of novels and tomes. The books were familiar yet different. I pulled out a copy of The Return of the King, the final volume of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and flipped to the ending, eager to relive one of my favorite climactic moments. But instead of Frodo's triumphant destruction of the ring, I found a dark twist. Sauron reclaiming it, plunging Middle-earth into eternal darkness under his reign. My breath caught in my throat. Alara, these endings, they're not right. She glanced up from a worn copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, her brow furrowed. You're kidding, she said, though her tone betrayed her disbelief. She flipped through the book, her face growing more unsettled as she read. In this version, Alice never returned home. Instead, she became trapped in Wonderland, the once whimsical world turning dark and cruel as she realized she was part of an endless nightmare. It wasn't just those books. To Kill a Mockingbird ended with the town succumbing to its worst instincts, Atticus ostracized, Scout left alone in a place consumed by hate. Each book we read carried the same unnerving thread, familiar stories twisted into something dark and hopeless. We couldn't explain it. The books looked authentic, and the writing matched the authors' voices, but the content wasn't right. Desperate for answers, we took a few of the books to a local bookstore. The owner was intrigued but skeptical, her raised brow suggesting she thought we were playing a prank. It didn't matter. This was the late 80s, and there was no internet to search for answers. As days turned into weeks, the pale blue door became part of our lives. We'd visit the study often, reading the altered books late into the night, our conversations circling back to our differences. The strangeness of it all became our new normal until, one day, the house offered something new. While rummaging through the shelves in the study, I discovered a hidden panel behind the desk. Inside was an old, withered book with no title or author. Its leather cover was cracked and faded. The book smelled of mildew and age, and as I opened it, I found a collection of dark, grim fairy tales I had never heard of. One story stood out, its words lingering in my mind like a faint echo. That night, as we lay in bed, I read it to Alara. In a realm where reality's edges softly fray, a hidden sanctum veiled by twilight exists. Here, the waters, clear as mirrors, do not reflect the heavens, but a void teeming with whispering stars. Light and darkness perform a delicate ballet of shadows and luminescence, revealing and obscuring truths. Spinning from unseen energies, this domain fluctuates between tranquility and a silent prison, resonating with the cosmic whispers of those drawn to explore its mysteries. The grand observatory above once pierced the celestial veil, its lens aligning mortal fates with the arcane dance of stars and shadowed voids. Below, the mirrors do more than reflect. They capture the very essence of those who dare gaze into them, holding echoes of souls adrift in time and space. As the sanctuary breathes with the quiet sighs of ancient walls, it watches with an unblinking, omniscient gaze. Hidden in the empty spaces, a ravenous entity feeds on the hushed fears and secret desires of those ensnared by its ancient allure. Alara stared at me with wide eyes as I jotted the words down on a scrap of paper. "What do you think it means?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what any of this means. Do you think we should tell someone?" She hesitated, then suggested, "The Whitakers? Maybe they'll believe us, or at least see it with their own eyes." It was a good idea. The following weekend, we invited the Whitakers over for dinner. After a pleasant meal, we gave them a tour of the house, steering them toward the hallway where the door was. Alara and I exchanged a nervous glance as we approached. But when we turned the corner, we froze. The door wasn't there. All we saw was the plain beige wall, unremarkable and innocuous. Alara and I tried to mask our shock, plastering on fake smiles as the Whitakers complimented the house. After they left, though, we were at a loss. "The house," Alara whispered, her voice trembling. "It's messing with us." We stayed up late that night, arguing over what to do. Were we going crazy? Was the house truly supernatural? Should we leave? But even as the fear grew, we couldn't deny the house hadn't harmed us. Not yet. Our argument was cut short by a sound, a distorted creak, like a door opening through static. It echoed faintly from the living room. We walked in cautiously, and there it was again. The pale blue door. This time it stood behind the television, its wood faded and cracked, the edges glinting faintly in the dim light. I wish I could say I was scared, but at that moment I was consumed by curiosity. I moved the TV aside, gripped the handle, and pulled the door open once more. It led to a dark observatory, a room unlike anything I'd ever seen. The air felt colder here, sharper. A massive antique telescope stood at the room's center, surrounded by desks cluttered with star charts and scattered notes. Planets I didn't recognize hung suspended from the ceiling, their surfaces glowing faintly in the moonlight that streamed through the domed windows. "Whoa," Alara murmured, her voice tinged with awe. We explored the room in silence, our unease momentarily replaced by wonder. The telescope, though ancient in design, was shockingly functional. I peered through the lens, expecting familiar constellations, but the stars weren't ours. The sky beyond the telescope was alien, a canvas of unnatural phenomena. A black star pulsed faintly in the distance, its void-like surface swallowing the surrounding light. Nearby, a shattered planet's exposed core glowed with an eerie, molten heat, its fractured surface hinting at cataclysmic destruction. Adjacent to this desolation, another planet teemed with life, but not as we know it. Its surface writhed with chaotic, erratic appendages, moving with deliberate, unsettling intent. "Ilara," I whispered, stepping back from the telescope. "This isn't our sky." She took her turn at the lens, her breath catching. Our unease grew palpable. Whatever this observatory was intended to reveal, it showed us vistas we were never meant to see. Scenes from a cosmos where the laws of nature were grotesquely twisted. As the reality of these discoveries settled in, the lines between what was real and what was part of the house's mysterious influence blurred. The telescope revealed sights that should have been awe-inspiring, but instead filled me with a sense of smallness, like I was staring at something I wasn't meant to see. I couldn't stop drawing them, charting them out as if mapping the skies might somehow make sense of it all. One night, while lying awake, the distorted creak of the door returned. This time, it came from our bathroom. I shook Alara awake, and together we walked to the bathroom. There, embedded in the shower wall, was the pale blue door again, its wood as worn and faded as before. I hesitated for a moment before pulling it open. We stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with a soft, white glow emanating from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Large mirrors lined the walls on either side, their surfaces pristine at first glance. The floor beneath us was cold, reflecting the light like polished obsidian. There was a path forward leading into the unknown. As we walked, the mirrors began to shift. At first, they were normal reflections of ourselves moving through the space. But then, they started to change. Some mirrors stretched tall and thin, while others were jagged and cracked. One showed my reflection lagging slightly behind me like it was struggling to keep up. Another displayed me smiling faintly, only I wasn't smiling. "Ilara," I said nervously, my eyes darting to her reflection. But she wasn't beside me in the glass. I turned quickly, relieved to see her still there, but she was frozen, staring into a mirror. "Finn," she said softly, her voice shaking. "You're not in this one." The longer we walked, the more surreal it became. The mirrors began reflecting impossible things, hallways that didn't exist, and scenes from our childhoods. One mirror showed me as a child, standing alone in a dimly lit room. My heart raced as I approached a particularly distorted mirror at the end of the hallway. There, a cracked mirror lay under a flickering light, casting an uneven, stuttering glow. From a distance, it was hard to make out the details, but a dark, menacing presence seemed to crowd the surface. As I drew closer, I heard a muffled voice. It was mine, coming from the other side of the glass. My own reflection was pressing its face against the mirror, sobbing uncontrollably. "You've got to help us!" It sobbed, its voice muffled yet unmistakably my own. "Alara, are you seeing this?" I said, not taking my eyes off the reflection. When she didn't respond, I turned to her. She was transfixed by a mirror where her own reflection crouched in the fetal position. "We're trapped in here," her reflection whispered. "It won't let us out." The air grew heavy and thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. As we backed away, the mirrors around us began to shift again. The reflections weren't ours anymore. They cried, their sobs filling the room, then laughed, a chilling, hollow sound that echoed endlessly. And then, silence. That's when the lights began to go out, one by one, starting from the far end of the hallway. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Alara's hand. We bolted back toward the door, the darkness chasing us, swallowing the mirrors and the path behind us. The sound of shattering glass filled the air, though nothing broke. We stumbled through the door and slammed it shut, gasping for air. "What the fuck is with this house?" I said between breaths. "I don't know," Alara said, her voice trembling. "But I'm starting not to like it. That was too much." The pale blue door stayed in the bathroom for weeks after that. We avoided it by using the guest bathroom instead. It became a symbol of unease, a thing neither of us wanted to confront. The house felt different now, less like a curiosity and more like a trap. We talked about selling it, about leaving everything behind, but we always stopped short of actually making plans. A part of us didn't want to admit how deeply the house had gotten under our skin. One day, as I was hanging up clothes in our bedroom closet, I froze. There it was again, the pale blue door, standing exactly where we'd first found it. I called for Alara, and she joined me, her expression mirroring my own apprehension. "What do you think it leads to this time?" I asked. "Are you serious?" she replied. "It could be anything. A twisted garden, another world, maybe a theater showing some warped version of movies we love. Who knows?" "Should we open it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Alara bit her lip, her curiosity warring with her fear. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to know as much as I did. "Maybe just a peek," she said finally. I nodded and pulled the door open. It swung silently, as it always did. The room beyond was eerily reminiscent of the first room we had found, but this time there was no ceiling, no walls. The single light bulb lay on the ground, casting a faint, lonely glow. The floor beneath us was like glass, perfectly smooth and reflective. As I stepped inside, the sound of my footsteps broke the silence. Splish, slosh, plop. It was like stepping on a shallow puddle, though no water clung to my shoes. Alara followed me, and together we walked into the void. The vibrations from our steps rippled outward, distorting our reflections on the floor. We walked for what felt like hours, the light from the bulb growing fainter with each step. Our curiosity outweighed our fear, and we decided to return the next day, better prepared. We planned to tie a rope to an anchor in the closet and bring a flashlight to see how far we could go. The next day, we hooked up the rope and ventured further into the abyss, holding each other's hands. The flashlight wasn't much use, but it gave us a small sense of security as we continued deeper. Every now and then, we looked back to see the dwindling light from the door, a tiny beacon in the vast darkness. Splish, slosh, plop. The sound of our steps on the wet-sounding floor filled the void. I shook my head, trying to catch my breath, but before I could respond to Alara's inquiry about the size of this place, I turned back toward the door. My heart stopped. The light spilling from the doorway was dimming, shrinking until it vanished completely. The sound of the door closing echoed like a gunshot in the silent expanse, leaving my ears ringing. I froze, paralyzed by fear. Then, without warning, the bulb shattered. Glass sprayed across the floor, plunging us into complete darkness. My flashlight flickered once before dying, leaving only the sound of our ragged breathing to fill the void. Then, behind us, came a sound. It moved slowly, wetly, like something dragging itself through thick, viscous mud. The squelch of movement sent a chill up my spine, and just as the noise ceased, a deafening splash echoed as though something massive had dropped into the water. Squelch, slosh, plop. "Ilara, run!" I screamed, grabbing her hand. The air behind us grew warmer and more stifling, a sign that something was rapidly closing the distance. We ran, following the rope as best we could. The faint tremors beneath our feet were the only reassurance that we were moving in the right direction. My mind raced, and panic blinded me to everything except the desperate need to escape. The splashing grew erratic and violent, as did whatever it was gained on us. "Jesus Christ, keep going, Ilara!" I screamed, my throat raw. The rope snapped, leaving us directionless momentarily, but we stumbled forward. Then finally, we slammed into the door. We pushed it open and spilled into the closet. I threw my body weight against the door, desperate to close it, but it wouldn't budge. Something on the other side was pushing back, clawing, fighting to keep it open. A sharp, searing pain shot through my shoulder as its claws tore into me, the heat behind the door unbearable now. Blood ran down my arm, soaking my shirt. "Go back to hell, you fucker!" Ilara screamed, throwing herself against the door to help me. It became a brutal struggle, one side pulling, the other pushing, a horrific tug of war for control. The thing clawed at me again, deeper this time, and I screamed, a mix of pain, fear, and raw desperation. Its guttural, animalistic wails echoed through the door, and then suddenly the resistance stopped. The door slammed shut with a force that shook the closet. We collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. The silence was deafening for a moment, then broken by a loud bang against the other side of the door. Whatever it was still there, throwing itself against the wood, trying to break through. Each impact made the walls tremble. "Ilara, let's go," I said, clutching my bleeding shoulder. She helped me to my feet, and we exited the house. That was the last night we ever spent there. We tried everything. We reported a break-in to the police, but when they inspected the house, the door was gone. There was no evidence, no explanation. Frustrated and fearful, we stayed with the Whitakers for a few nights, then in cheap motels and sometimes even in our car. The thought of burning the house crossed our minds more than once, but something stopped us, maybe fear or guilt. The door became more capricious as the days passed, appearing in unexpected places with growing urgency. It would show up under our bed, on the ceiling, behind mirrors, initially quiet with faint knocking that escalated into loud, desperate banging. The encounters became too frequent, too terrifying to ignore. Eventually, we put the house up for sale. We were young and broke, and the house was all we had. It became harder to justify the truth, even to ourselves. We told the realtor we were relocating and that it was too much of a house for us. And when the offer came, a young couple with a little girl no older than 6, we accepted. As we emptied the house, the door appeared less and less. The banging and the faint knocking all stopped as we packed. But even as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us go. That was years ago. Ilara doesn't talk about it anymore, but it never left me. I've carried the weight of what we did and left behind. A few months ago, I looked up the address on Google Earth. The house is still standing. In the street view image, there's a family unloading boxes. A man and woman smiling with 2 kids playing in the yard. If you ever stumble upon a door that seems out of place, a door that leads to realms beyond the grasp of your understanding, to dimensions that twist and shatter reality, don't open it. Some doors are not meant to be opened. Have you ever been driving on a long stretch of road? Who am I kidding? Of course you have. If you're from the Midwest, you know that it's always better to drive for 10 hours than to fly for 3 hours. Well, since we both know you have you ever been in the middle of nowhere and seen a sign that says, "Mystery Spot, only 10 miles," before? If you have, and you had a family like mine, then you've been to places like that. A rundown tourist trap full of monkey torsos sewn to fishtails, jackalope mounts, and rooms built to look level but are actually on an incline. These hokey horror houses were my bread and butter growing up. Every year my mom, dad, and I would stop in for a couple hours of middle-class fun. I could never figure out how they managed to get a ball to roll uphill, or why their mermaid wasn't on the news. Now I know that everything in those places were fakes and illusions, but when you're a kid, you vow to get to the bottom of these mysterious marvels. Now that I'm a 24-year-old man, I've found true horrors, and now I wish I hadn't. It all started when my favorite mystery spot went on the market. I went to the bank, got myself a predatory small business loan, and bought the place. The predatory nature of the loan didn't bother me. I was going to make millions. It was set back about a quarter mile from the road. The place was collapsing on its own weight. That wasn't what I was there for. I was bound and determined to be the first person to capture the Michigan dogman, dead or alive. Was it a werewolf? Was it a creature forgotten by Mother Nature? I didn't know. This creature has haunted me since I was in high school. I'll never forget the night my nightmares became my waking life. In November 2017, I was a 17-year-old football player. If you're from the north, you know just how dark it gets by 5 p.m. So at 7 p.m., it was dark. My dad had dropped me off at practice that afternoon. So my coach gave me and a few other teammates a ride home that night. We stayed late that night to strategize for the semifinals, so we left at around 7 p.m. Coach loaded 5 of us into his minivan and we shoved off. Shane was the first person to be dropped off because he lived in town. Then it was Devin. Then it was Bryson. Once it was down to Wayne and I, we started to drive down some back roads. We both lived off the beaten trail. Wayne lived close to the border of Hiawatha National Forest on a windy dirt road. Wayne and I were getting pretty rowdy in the back, talking about how we were going to dominate in the semifinals. Coach, as a joke, kicked Wayne out of the van. Coach, all right, you got to walk back from here. As a willing participant, Wayne threw up his hands and got out of the car. The plan was that Coach was going to drive around the bend, turn around, and pick him back up. Coach and I were laughing as we drove away. Then we turned around. As we were driving back to Wayne, we saw in the headlights that he was hauling tail back towards us. The look in his eyes was of pure terror. I threw open the van door. Wayne, drive! Coach spun the van around and hit the gas. That was when the entire van started to shake. Wayne was screaming and crying, and Coach was using some very colorful language. I turned around and looked out of the back window. I saw glowing cherry red eyes. It looked straight into me, and I swear I heard it sat Brent. Did it know my name? Once it finally let us go and we got back to Wayne's house, we all got out, and that was when we noticed Wayne's leg. There was a huge bite that was leaking like a sieve. There was a matching bite mark on the rear bumper. Needless to say, Coach lost his job. He was ticketed for $1,000 and sentenced to 1 month in jail. Everyone knew Coach and knew that he wasn't being malicious, but the law was the law. The judge gave him the lower end of the sentencing, or else he would have been disbarred. Coach is still friends with Wayne's family all these years later. About a month after the initial incident, Wayne went missing. Unfortunately, that wasn't uncommon. Older teens and young adults constantly ditch this town. They hop on the freight train and try to make their way to Detroit. This was different. Wayne was my best friend. He never mentioned to me that he had any big city dreams. It was quite the opposite. He never planned on leaving. He loved this town. No one listened. But I know it had something to do with the dog man. And I dedicated the rest of my life to finding it. And Wayne. Wayne's parents assumed he was another victim of drug abuse. In our small town, you had 3 options. First, get a job at the paper factory and never leave. 2, skip town and look for a better life in a bigger place. 3, choose a substance and abuse the crap out of it. Unfortunately, option 3 was the most common in our town. Heroin and alcohol practically flowed through town like a river. Every year, someone would be found dead at the bottom of the dam just outside of town. If they managed to not die, they'd return to their families crying and begging, "Please forgive me," not knowing just how much they'd killed their families, how much this destroyed them. This is what Wayne's family thought happened to him. I believed something else. Unfortunately, I was the one who spiraled into the sinkhole that is substance abuse. After I lost my best friend, I tried everything: shrooms, LSD, cocaine, and heroin. It was during one of my binges that the idea struck me to buy the mystery spot. I had a vision of myself triumphantly displaying the beast that destroyed my life. My drug-fueled brain began to concoct the plan to capture the Michigan Dogman. The whole reason I bought the mystery spot was to show the world the true horrors that lurk in the forest, not these P.T. Barnum-style scams. I was hell-bent on capturing the cursed Michigan Dogman that took my friend from me all those years ago. I had become obsessed with the idea that I could overpower it and put it on display for all the world to see. I'd studied the Michigan Dogman, and from my studies, there were 3 possibilities as to what this beast was. 1. A creature that has evolved alongside us, possibly an undiscovered subspecies of wolf. 2. A genetic marvel where somehow a bear and a wolf, probably in a lab, were crossed. This theory would explain why the prints left behind share characteristics of wolves and bears. 3. As unlikely as it may be, it could be a victim of lycanthropy. I prepared myself for all of these possibilities. I'd built an enclosure that was fit for a Kodiak bear. It was based on the Kodiak pen at the Toledo Zoo in Ohio, and inside, I had a silver chain. Making the silver chain was no small feat. Months of finding silver dollars, thrifting actual silverware, and buying damaged jewelry. I bought a forge and as many crucibles as it took. This creature was going to make me millions from ticket sales, and inevitably when the government decides to pay me to study the beast, I was certain that I had made a foolproof trap. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was a cold night in February. The moon was full, and I was at the last place I saw the Michigan Dogman. I was armed with a rifle loaded with elephant tranquilizer, and I was walking down Wayne's old road. The moon was full and bright. The stars paled in the brilliance of the silver glow. With the snow in the woods and on the road, I had no problem seeing. Tied to the back of my belt, on a 15-foot length of rope, was a sack full of deer entrails. I was dragging it behind me the same way a bass fisherman trolls a lake with a plow jockey. I heard wolves howling in the distance. They knew where I was, but I hadn't gone there for them. I was after the bigger fish. I was so consumed with my hatred for the beast, overwhelmed with my desire for revenge, blinded by my pride and love of money. I was going to win. Then I heard it, a cross between a bear's growl and a wolf's howl. I felt a tug on my rope and I stopped. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation, a craving that I can only compare to the craving for another hit of tar. I turned and saw the dogman holding the sack in his paw. Although his XPR 66 was hard to read, I felt as though he were smiling at me. I smiled back, euphoria sinking into my bones. The world slowed down. I felt higher than a kite. Me, you're coming home with me. Then it spoke. Dogman, I'm not going anywhere with you, Brent. There went the naturalistic explanation. I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, Brent, you idiot. Why are you doing this? And I would answer back to you. Why do you drink when even one damages your liver? Why do you smoke when you know it'll damage your lungs? Why do you smoke weed when you know it damages your brain? It's because you think you're special, that you're the exception to the rule. I wasn't. You're not either. I laughed as I raised my gun. I pulled the trigger and the tranquilizer dart slammed into him with a shunk. The beast took a step forward. I fired again. Shunk. 2 more steps. I fired some more. Shunk, shunk, shunk. The dogman faltered. He took a knee. He got back up. I unloaded. Shunk, 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 shunk. Although he was knocked out, I was extra careful. I put a silver muzzle on his mouth, silver shackles on his arms and legs, and chained him to the nearest tree. I walked back to my truck, drive back to him, and used my winch to get him in the bed of my truck. The next day, after I'd caged him, I called my family, Coach, and Wayne's family to come see. I thought that if this was a werewolf, he'd turn back into a human. But I guess over the centuries, details had been changed. Apparently the wolf form was a permanent change. When they all arrived, I brought them to the enclosure that I had dramatically curtained. Me. After all these years, I found him. The one who destroyed our lives. the one who took Wayne from us. With a flourish, I tore the veil from the cage, and they beheld the Michigan dogman. The look of horror when they laid eyes on the monster filled me with jubilation. That was only interrupted when I heard Wayne's mom, Jen, speak. "Jen, Wayne?" I spun around and there he was. Wayne. He was entirely naked. He was chained and bleeding. He was crying. I immediately swung the gate open and unbound him. Me. "Wayne, are you okay?" Before I could hug him and get him a blanket to cover up, he began to laugh. His skin sprouted fur. His bones began to snap and crack as he stretched into a horrible shape. The skin around his mouth tore as it elongated into a snout. He grabbed me by my throat and flung me into the cage. My head slammed into the wall and everything went black. When I awoke, I saw a bite torn into my thigh. I then looked out of the bars and saw the mess. My family's, Coach's, and Wayne's family's bodies were twisted and gored. Their entrails were woven into a grotesque message. I vomited as I beheld the scene. I stood back up and read the bloody message. "Please forgive me.